Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Ridyantasto Hibhadrani Vidunoti Suritsatam Nasta Prayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki. So welcome everyone to this wonderful opportunity to glorify the Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam through collectively hearing the wonderful pastimes of the Lord's pastimes out of Vrindavan. Today we're reading from chapter 3 of the third canto and text 28. So repeatedly, Anam Chorurasam Tebyo Anam Chorurasam Tebyo Dadva Bhagavad Arpanam Dadva Bhagavad Arpanam Goviprata Savashuraha Goviprata Savashuraha Pranimur Bhuvi Murdabihi Pranimur Bhuvi Murdabihi Anam Chorurasam Tebyo Dadva Bhagavad Arpanam Goviprata Savashuraha Pranimur Bhuvi Murdabihi Anam Chorurasam Tebyo Dadva Bhagavad Arpanam Goviprata Savashuraha Pranimur Bhuvi Murdabihi. Anam Chorurasam Tebyo Dadva Bhagavad Arpanam Goviprata Savasuraha Pranimur Bhuvi Murdabihi Anam Chorurasam Tebyo Dadva Bhagavad Arpanam Goviprata Savasuraha Pranimur Bhuvi Murdabihi Anam Chorurasam Tebyo Dadva Bhagavad Arpanam Goviprata Savasuraha Pranimur Bhuvi Murdabihi. Anam Chorurasam Tebyo Dadva Bhagavad Arpanam Goviprata Savasuraha Pranimur Bhuvi Murdabihi. Anam Chorurasam Tebyo Dadva Bhagavad Arpanam Goviprata Savashuraha Pranimur Bhuvi Murdabihi. Word by word. Anam, foodstuff. Cha, also. Ururasam, highly delicious. Tebyaha, unto the Brahmanas. Dadva, after supplying. Bhagavat Arpanam, which was first offered to the personality of Godhead. Go, cow. Vipra, Brahmanas. Artha, purpose. Asavaha, purpose of living. Shuraha, all the valiant Kshatriyas. Pranemahu, offered obeisances. Bhuvi, touching the ground. Murdabihi, with their heads. Translation and divine purport by His Divine Grace, Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thereafter they offered the Brahmanas highly delicious foodstuffs, which were first offered to the personality of Godhead, and they offered their respectful obeisances by touching their heads to the ground. They lived perfectly by protecting the cows and the Brahmanas. Purport. The behavior exhibited by the descendants of Yadu in the pilgrimage site of Prabhasa was highly cultured and exactly to the point of human perfection. The perfection of human life is attained by following three principles of civilization: protecting the cows, maintaining the Brahminical culture, and, above all, becoming a pure devotee of the Lord. Without becoming a devotee of the Lord, one cannot perfect one's human life. The perfection of human life is to be elevated to the spiritual world, where there is no birth, no death, no diseases, and no old age. That is the highest perfectional aim of human life. Without this aim, any amount of material advancement in so-called comforts can only bring the defeat of the human form of life. Brahmanas and Vaishnavas do not accept any foodstuff which is not first offered to the personality of Godhead. Foodstuff offered to the Lord is accepted by the devotees as the mercy of the Lord. After all, the Lord supplies all kinds of foodstuff, both to the human being and to other animals. A human being must be conscious of the fact that all foodstuffs, namely grains, vegetables, milk, water, etc., the prime necessities of life, are supplied by the Lord for mankind, and such foodstuffs cannot be manufactured by any scientist or materialist in a laboratory or factory established by human effort. The intelligent class of men are called Brahmanas, and those who have realized the absolute truth in His supreme personal feature are called Vaishnavas, but both of them accept foodstuffs which are the remnants of sacrifice. Sacrifice is ultimately meant to satisfy the Yajna Purusha, Vishnu, in Bhagavad Gita 3:13. It is said that one who accepts foodstuffs as the remnants of sacrifice is freed from all sinful reactions, and one who cooks foodstuffs for maintenance of his body takes in all kinds of sins, which lead only to suffering. The foodstuffs prepared by the Yadus at the Prabhasa pilgrimage site to offer to the bona fide Brahmanas, there were all offered to the personality of Godhead, Vishnu. They offered their sincere obeisances by touching their heads to the ground. The Yadus, or any enlightened family in Vedic culture, are trained for attainment of human perfection by total cooperation of service between the different divisions of social orders. The word ururasam is also significant here. Hundreds of delicacies can be prepared simply by the combination of grains, vegetables, and milk. All such preparations are in the mode of goodness, and therefore can be offered to the personality of Godhead. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 9:26, the Lord accepts only foodstuffs which are within the range of fruits, flowers, leaves, and liquids, provided they are offered in complete devotional service. Devotional service is the only criterion for a bona fide offering to the Lord. The Lord assures that He positively eats such foodstuffs offered by the devotees. So judging from all sides, the Yadus were perfectly trained civilized persons, and their being cursed by the Brahmana sages was only by the desire of the Lord. The whole incident was a warning to all concerned that no one should behave lightly with Brahmanas and Vaishnavas. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 3rd chapter, 3rd canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Lord's Pastimes Out of Vrindavan. So, Guru Pranam. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Prachadine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavanishwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gauda Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Welcome, dear devotees, for this wonderful class that we have the great fortune to be given to be discussing these beautiful activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is the concluding purport of the text of the chapter entitled The Lord's Activities Out of Vrindavan. And so the next chapter is entitled Lord Vidura Approaches Maitreya. So we're just going to have a bit of a background as to who is Vidura. We're also going to have a discussion on the Brahmanas. What's so important about the Brahmanas? Why are they fed first in the Vedic sacrifices? And then we're also going to have a lot of people may not have heard the song of the Avanti Brahmana, which is Canto 11 of chapter 23. So it's a very beautiful discussion of Brahminical qualities and how they can be misused and then how they can be reformed as well. So I pray that I can get your blessings from all the senior Vaishnavas here, that I can say the right things at the right time in the right mood to properly glorify their Supreme Goddess and God, Krishna and Srimati Radharani. So starting with the qualities of the Brahmanas, we hear the Brahmanas are peaceful, they are truthful, they are austere as well, and they have so many wonderful qualities. So it's also, in this chapter was explaining about the prasadam. And the prasadam in Krishna consciousness is so important. And in researching this, I looked at an analysis of Prabhupada in a room conversation. And Prabhupada was saying we're not actually vegetarians or non-vegetarians, we're prasadarians. So that's the important point. We take the prasadam that's been offered to Krishna as mercy. So, and then further to that point, when we look at Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was so determined to give the prasadam to the devotees that he would often feed them, and he had big hands. He's 7 foot tall with arms down to his thighs and very beautiful. And so Lord Chaitanya gave food that would filled 5 of his hands. So that's the way Lord Chaitanya would give prasadam to the devotees in loving reciprocation. Prasadam is very important to devotees, and Urmila Mataji was explaining that she brought her father to the temple, and her father asked the question of Prabhupada, what's so important about the prasadam? The devotees are collecting funds and then they're distributing the prasadam to people. And Srila Prabhupada's response was, it's like if you take the remnants of someone who has an infectious disease, then you catch that infectious disease. So if we take the prasadam of Krishna, then we could become infected with Krishna consciousness. So we're all very eager to become more and more Krishna conscious, so we take on the remnants of Sri Krishna. So Prabhupada here is explaining the qualities of the Brahmanas. And then in Krishna's discussion with Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 7, text 25, we hear, Naham prakasha sarvasya yoga mayam samavritaha mudoyam nabijanati loko mam ajam avyayam. So I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them I am covered by my eternal creative potency, yoga maya, and so the deluded world knows me not, who am unborn and infallible. So what Krishna is explaining here is we have to become Brahminical or intelligent to understand Krishna, because there's so many easy ways to become deluded by the modes of material nature. And then if we become Brahminical, we develop these qualities, and then we can ultimately understand Krishna. Because as we know, param brahma, param dhamam, parvitram, paramam dhamma. So we have to become pure and intelligent to understand Krishna. So these Brahminical qualities will help us. And essentially, if we look at there's 6 karmas or activities that the Brahmanas have to be engaged in. They have to learn the Vedic scriptures and they have to teach. So it's not so much so the Brahmanas will sit down and learn and I'm learning for myself. There is also an aspect of teaching. And if you study, even in Harvard Medical School, they say even if you're learning to perform these activities of surgery, not only do you have to learn it, but you have to teach others. So that was originated from the Brahminical culture. There's the learning and then there's the teaching. And then secondarily, there's the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we also have to teach others how to worship. So these are all Brahminical qualities. And then finally, the last one is where one has to accept charity and one also has to give charity. So these are the 6 important karmas or the activities of the Brahmanas. And then if we go to Bhagavad Gita chapter 18, text 42, Krishna is explaining, Shamo damastapa shocham shantir ajavam evacha jnanam vijnanam astikyam brahma karma svabhavajam. So peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religiousness, these are the natural qualities by which the Brahmanas work. So Prabhupada was explaining on the day after Gaur Panim, how do we become tolerant? And so essentially Prabhupada's response was the example of the tree. So the tree provides so many fruits, so many beautiful flowers, shelter for birds. Even woodpeckers go in there, peck a hole, and it's a whole house for a family of birds. And so Prabhupada's response was, even the tree is so tolerant that if you cut a limb off of the tree, there's no protest. If you completely cut off the whole tree, then there's still no protest. So that's Prabhupada's explanation to us to become more tolerant, like a tree. If someone speaks to us with harsh words, then still it's tolerance and no protest at all. So as we go through that, there's peacefulness, and don't we become happy when we're in the association of the peaceful devotees? No matter what happens, they can always be peaceful. And perhaps one of the greatest examples of this is Radhanath Swami in our modern Krishna consciousness movement. You can sense that he's always peaceful. Even when he's speaking about these difficult circumstances and traveling around, he always emanates this vibrancy of peacefulness. And then the self-control is there with regards to the regulative principles: no illicit sex, no gambling, no meat eating, and no intoxication. And perhaps one of the most important things of the Brahmanas is the honesty. So the truthfulness has to be there. We have to be not only purveying ourselves in a truthful manner, but being truthful with ourselves. Because ultimately Krishna is in the heart of every living entity. Sarvasya chaham hridisani vishto. So we know that Krishna can see everything. So the importance of having honesty with our dealings with others, honesty with ourselves, is extremely important. So we go on to the song of the Avanti Brahmana. And it's a very beautiful, in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's also there in the Uddhava Gita, chapter 17, the song of the Avanti Brahmana. And I chose especially this pastime or these activities so that we can learn, because sometimes people go astray in their Brahminical qualities. And so what are the actual actions that one can do to rectify that? Because there's always prayaschita. There's always atonement. No matter what we do, even if it's completely heinous, there's always prayaschita or atonement. And I remember one story in Vrindavan. There was a beautiful tree there, this big banyan tree, and so many cows. If anyone's been to Vrindavan in summertime, it gets to 50 degrees. The hottest recorded temperature in the whole earthly planetary system has been there at Govardhan Hill. It's 50 degrees. And as we know that there's cows, Gomata, walking around in Govardhan Hill with no shelter. So there was this big banyan tree, and then so all these cows were sheltering underneath this tree. And so even the sadhus would come there, doing Govardhan Parikram, like I've taken my bath, I've begged for my prasadam for the day, where do I go? Okay, there's a nice tree there where at least we can have the association of the beautiful cows, which are always pure, and then therefore I can be peaceful and happy and do my bhajan. So then someone cut this tree down. So this is an action which there is prayaschita for that. And so the prayaschita recommended was to feed the cows. So the atonement recommended by the sadhus, because they can see this. A tree was cut down in order to build a hospital, but the best thing was providing shelter for the cows, because we know go brahmanaya hitayacha. So the cows are first. The cows are very pleasing to Krishna, and so there is still prayaschita for that. So in the song of the Avanti Brahmana, we hear there was a very amazing Brahmana who grew up in a beautiful Brahmana family. They taught him from birth about the Brahminical qualities of chanting bhajans, offering artis to the deities, just reading Bhagavatam, teaching Bhagavatam, accepting charity, giving charity as well, all the qualities of the Brahmanas. But then as a result of this Brahmana's austerities and his actions, he started receiving a lot of money. So then he became greedy. And so as his treasury built up, then he started becoming more lusty and more greedy, and he had this anger in him. So any of one of his servants or his family members, he spoke with harsh words. And as we know from the next text, when someone hits us with hard words, it goes into the core of our hearts. So much so that in the next chapter, the whole destruction of the Yadu dynasty comes about as a result of the harsh words, because there's fighting. And so it says here that even a saintly person in this world is not capable of resettling his own mind after it has been disturbed by the insulting words of uncivilized men. So a Brahmana is qualified to be tolerant and peaceful. How this Avanti Brahmana became lusty and greedy as a result of his treasury growing. And so he was very nasty to his family and his servants, all his subordinates. So what happened was, gradually, as a result of the harsh words, then Lakshmi decided to leave his house. Because as we know, Lakshmi is an expansion of Srimati Radharani, and Lakshmi will not stay in that house where there's disagreement, where there's harsh words. So Lakshmi left the house of the Avanti Brahmana, and so gradually, so that the government authorities started taxing him more heavily, he started receiving penalties and fines, till it got to the point where he had nothing left. So what was the Avanti Brahmana to do? He had all the Shastric knowledge, everything, and so then he thought, okay, I'll take sannyas. How much misery, how much pain, how much trepidation can fall upon a sannyasi with a sannyas rod and a lota or water pot in order to collect his begging bowl? Who would treat a sannyasi Brahmana in such a terrible way? So he goes out onto the parikram marg, he puts his water pot down, and so then as a result of the way he treated his family members and his subordinates, that came back to him. Because we know there's karma. So even with the sannyas danda and with the water pot, and then so people started insulting him. they started speaking to him with such harsh words. And even as sannyasi Brahmana, it penetrated into the core of his heart. He became very unsettled. So much so that after a whole day of begging, he's finally filled up his water pot with a little bit of rupees, and then he goes and buys some prasadam, and then he sits on the bank of the Jamuna River thinking, okay, finally I can be peaceful and happy. And then people come and urinate on his prasadam. They come and pass foul air in his presence because he'd performed, as a Brahmana, performed all those, he had to live through all those activities of the repercussions of his negative actions. So the Avanti Brahmana started thinking, what is Krishna trying to teach me here? And so then essentially what it was he came to the realization that all this is the mind. So the mind accepts and it rejects, and no matter what situation we're in, we can be Krishna conscious, even if we're becoming victim of harsh, intolerable words, or even if we're receiving favorable words. It's just the action of the mind. So he started realizing this, and he started increasing his bhajan, and he thought, I'm going to just live out my sannyas vow now. I'm going to just do the best I can, and whatever is due to me as a result of providence, whether it's harsh, insulting words or anything, I'm still going to remain resolute in my determination to become a devotee. So he underwent theft, violence, people started speaking lies about him, so much so that he gave up the danda and he gave up the saffron cloth. And he started walking around like a beggar with no clothes. This is like a Brahmana who had so much wealth. He lost everything. And so still, he had that determination, I want to be a Krishna conscious devotee. And so even wandering around the world, everyone saw him as a dirty beggar. Rowdy persons would dishonor him with many insults and saying, this man is just a thief, he doesn't deserve any charity at all. And then so his resolution was for his mind to be perfectly fixed and pacified. And then he started inquiring from the sadhus, how do I become more fearless? How do I bring the mind under control? And essentially what was given to this Avanti Brahmana was the divine nectar of worshipping Krishna's lotus feet, because we know from the Upadeshamrita of Rupa Goswami that to bring the mind under control is actually worshipping the lotus feet of Krishna. So as the story progresses, it says, anyone who listens or recites to this wonderful song of the sannyasi Avanti Brahmana, which presents scientific knowledge of the Absolute, and who thus meditates upon it with full attention, will never again be overwhelmed by the dualities of material happiness and distress. So it's a very important lesson for us because as a result of Varnashram Dharma, we can become very wealthy. As we know, Varnashram Dharma is material piety. So Krishna responds, but then as we know, the perfect Brahmana will not allow any gold coins or any wealth to accumulate. It will be a matter of extinguishing that wealth on that day. It's explained before the sun has set. Any funds that have come in, they should be utilized in Krishna's service straight away. And so it's a great example that we can all use in our Krishna consciousness to help us to become better devotees. So then there's an amazing devotee by the name of Vidura, and especially it's important in the next chapter is Vidura approaching Maitreya. So if we go through an analysis of who was Vidura, we know that in his previous life he was Yamaraj. And so then there's a beautiful pastime when there's a wonderful devotee by the name of Mandavya Muni, and he lived in a hermitage in the forest, living very simply on the forest berries and very simple lifestyle, focusing on his bhajan and his love and dedication to Supreme Radha and Krishna by performing artis and so much in a very secluded place. So Mandavya Muni, he came back to his hermitage and he found everything was stolen. His house was burned and so many terrible things had happened to his house. So then the soldiers in the army came to him and said, oh, we see that you've thieved, you've destroyed this house, so we're going to have to take you to jail. So he's wrongly accused of a crime, this Mandavya Muni. So then the jailers were particularly severe on him, and they said, as a result of your theft and the destruction of this property, we're going to sentence you to death. So Mandavya Muni was waiting had a week left to live, and then his head would be cut off on the gallows. So Mandavya Muni lived through this, and then right at the final hour, literally it was like the jailer came in and said, we're going to pull you out to the gallows. This is the last chance. If you have any prayers to say, now's your time. And then instantly there was, in the super soul, the king had this thought, well, this is Mandavya Muni. He's actually a great sage. What are we doing? We've committed a terrible atrocity by locking him up and then sentencing him to death. I have to do something about it. So the king runs down there and stops the death or the sacrifice of Mandavya Muni. And then he apologizes and says, okay, you can go back to your hermitage, everything will be okay. But Mandavya Muni said, this is punishment. I haven't done anything wrong. I've been a forest dweller living on berries for so many years. Why am I now under this terrible punishment? And so then he approaches Yamaraj, who gives all punishment in this world, and he said to Yamaraj, what have I done wrong? And Yamaraj's response was, when you were a child, as a result of a blade that was in your hand, you dropped it on the ground and then it severed the limb of an ant. So as a result of that, you had to be incarcerated like the ant, suffering for a certain amount of time. Then eventually the wound healed on the ant's leg, and then he was able to live his life. So in the same way, you were incarcerated for a certain amount of time. Now you're able to live your life. So Mandavya Muni cursed him. He said, this is punishment which is so far greater than what I actually performed. I was a child. How can a child be held responsible for an atrocity? And so he cursed Yamaraj, and he said, in your next life you will be born a Shudra in a very unfortunate situation. So building this, we understand that Vidura is the son of Vyasadeva. So Vyasadeva wanted to have children with Ambika and Ambalika, the two sisters. However, they felt that Vyasadeva was a little bit above their level of being able to be a diligent, chaste wife, he was like, it's Vyasadeva. So however, then another lady came forward named Shudri, and she was a maidservant, and then they had the child Vidura. So we understand Vidura's wonderful qualities through his exhibitions with the Pandavas and his ability to save the Pandavas. So as we know, Duryodhana wanted to set fire to the Pandavas in their house. He built a house of lac, which is a very flammable material, and he wanted to send the Pandavas to that fire and burn them alive. So Vidura spoke in a local dialect to Yudhisthira Maharaj, because Vidura and Yudhisthira have a very interesting relationship, with Vidura being Yamaraj, and we know Yudhisthira is the son of Dharmaraj. So essentially Vidura spoke to Yudhisthira in a local dialect, and it was a riddle, saying, there are people who can be killed but not by arrows or swords. However, the snake who goes underground will not be burnt by fire. In a local dialect, so Duryodhana's soldiers couldn't hear it. And then so that was the message that Vidura gave to Yudhisthira, thus saving the Pandavas. As a result, they understood they had to dig a hole underneath the house, and that allowed them, when the house was on fire, they could get out. So essentially Vidura saved them that way. Vidura saved them a lot of other times as well, using very strong, harsh words to Dhritarashtra. Because in devotional service we know that we should not preach to the faithless. The 9th offense that we read every morning is not to preach to the faithless. So Prabhupada's explanation of that, anyone who listens actually has faith. So when you go out on book distribution and you try and talk to people about Krishna, I don't want to hear, okay, no faith. So therefore it would be an offense for us to try and, talk to them. However, someone who just listens, even if we think, and Vidura never gave up on his friendship of Dhritarashtra. Throughout his whole life he spoke to Dhritarashtra so many times, to the extent there's a whole shastra named Vidura Niti, or the ethics and morality, and this all came from Vidura. And the modern day understanding of Niti Shastra is written by Chanayaka, and a lot of Chanayaka, Prabhupada has used a lot of Chanayaka's words in his Srimad Bhagavatam. And Niti means the ethics and morality. So Vidura saved the Pandava brothers so many times, and as a result of that he was very much loved by Krishna. And it's explained that right when Krishna was leaving to go back to Goloka Vrindavan, and it's very important to understand that Krishna is aja, or unborn. So he didn't leave a material body in this material world when he left to go back to home. Everyone in Vishnu Tattva, all the Dash avatars, they all take their body with them when they go back home. When Nrsingadev, there's no one will ever find, in this cave we found bones of Nrsingadev. It's bogus, because the Vishnu Tattva, they all take their bodies back home, back to Godhead. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu all take their body back home, back to Godhead. So it's really, when we go into a deeper analysis of Vidura, he gave so much friendship, so much good counsel to Dhritarashtra. And even though Dhritarashtra was so much persuaded by his son Duryodhana, he still listened to the advice from Vidura. And so eventually Vidura was evicted. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam we understand that Duryodhana is speaking so harshly. He's saying, throw him out of the kingdom and leave him with only his breath. Literally, take everything away from Vidura. And so Vidura, being peaceful, and he was austere, and he was truthful, and he was kind, had all the Brahminical qualities, he went on pilgrimage. So he went on pilgrimage to meet sages, and Prabhupada reminds us we don't go to Vrindavan just to bathe in the water or take the prasadam. We go there to inquire from the saintly people. So the devotees who have demonstrated themselves as being great devotees by their commitment to Srila Prabhupada, the amount of time they've spent there, then we can inquire submissively from them. So the next chapter is building up to the Vidura approaching Maitreya. And there's also another beautiful pastime which explains Krishna's magnanimity and his compassion and his kindness. Because one time Krishna approaches Duryodhana, and Duryodhana wanted to become friends with Krishna. So he says, why don't you stay in my house tonight? I can give you nice food. And then there's two reasons why you would accept food from someone. The first one is if you're hungry, and the second one is if there's some affection between the two parties. So Krishna's response was, I'm not going to eat in your house because firstly, I'm not hungry, and secondly, I have no affection towards you because of the atrocities you've committed to the Pandavas. So Krishna decides, well, perhaps I'll stay in the house of Vidura. So he knocks on Vidura's door, and then Vidura's wife opens the door, and she's completely flustered. Oh, my Krishna's here. What am I going to? I haven't prepared anything. What am I going to do? It's Krishna. So then all of a sudden she starts peeling banana, gives it to Krishna. Krishna eats the banana, peeling another banana, gives it to Krishna. And Krishna had all his required bananas. And then Vidura, and then Krishna says, okay, I'll be back later to stay. And then so Vidura comes back and sees this scene, and Vidura's wife is got blushing cheeks, and she's sweating, and she's anxious. And then Vidura says to her, what did you feed Krishna? And she said, I fed him the bananas. And then they look over in the corner, and there's the bananas. What she'd be doing is giving Krishna the banana peels and then throwing the actual bananas in the corner. So this is Krishna's magnanimity. It's not recommended that we sit here and say, oh, Krishna loves banana peels. Let's give Krishna banana peels. No, it's a wonderful way that Krishna accepts anything with love. When it's offered with love, patram pushpam palam toyam. If there's fruit, flowers, leaf or water, with love I will accept it. So as we go further into the analysis of Vidura, he had so much wisdom and he had so many wonderful qualities. And it's explained that even the devatas can commit mistakes. So Yamaraj is explained as one of the Mahajans, or the great authorities, and then he still commits mistakes. As we go to chapter 15, text 16 of the Bhagavad Gita. Dvavimo purusho loke ksharas chaksara evacha shara sarvani bhutani kutosh dakshara uchate. There are two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In the material world, every entity is fallible, and in the spiritual world, every entity is called infallible. So, from this story, we can hear that a lot, you might think, well, Mandavya Muni, he did nothing wrong, only such a small crime of, piercing an ant and then causing a pain to him. So that was only small, but there was disproportionate punishment. However, it's Krishna personally who arranges that no one gets a disproportionate amount of suffering. So in the long run, Krishna adjusts the karmic balance. So Mandavya Muni must have done something wrong, and then so as a result of that, he had to suffer the injustice of being incarcerated. And so then we understand that devatas, they can commit mistakes, but Krishna, is infallible. He never commits any mistakes. He is perfectly omniscient, perfectly omnipotent, and perfectly omnipresent everywhere in every situation. So essentially, when you look at why Vidura was born as a result of the curse of Mandavya Rishi, and he guides Dhritarashtra regularly, therefore endearing himself towards Krishna. So it's a very beautiful chapter, and we're very fortunate to be reading in the association of the devotees. And then as a result of understanding, like you think, well, Vidura, he was born from a Shudra, so what is his qualification to become the Prime Minister and give instruction to Dhritarashtra? And the answer lies in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 8, 128, where it's explained, whether one is a Brahmana, a sannyasi, or a Shudra, regardless of what he is, he can become a spiritual master if he knows the science of Krishna. So we know Rupa Goswami in text 1 of Upadeshamrita explains if we can control our tongue, if we can control our mind, our belly, our genitals, then we can become a spiritual master of the entire world. So this verse in itself is very important to the Krishna consciousness movement, because you see other sampradayas or apa sampradayas explaining that, even the highest exalted, we have Rupa Goswami, Vande Rupa, Sanatana Raghugo, Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Gopalako. So we worship the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, but they were born in Mohammedan families. So there's no disqualification as long as an individual has those qualities of being a spiritual master. And then so as we go there, we can understand that Ramananda Rai also belonged to the Shudra class. So why would Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu be sitting down submissively hearing from Ramananda Roy? Because he set the example for us. Whether one is a Brahmana, a sannyasi, or Shudra, regardless of what he is, he can become a spiritual master if he knows the science of Krishna. So everyone is capable of being a spiritual master. Every one of us can give sound advice to people about how to become devotees. We can study. This is the highest qualification. We can become Brahmanas. We can give this Brahminical knowledge to others. We can understand how to worship properly, and we can teach others how to worship properly. So whether it's, that's the beautiful statement that Lord Chaitanya gave us, where he said, I am not Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, nor am I sannyasi, grihastha, or whatever. If anyone can become a spiritual master if one simply understands this spiritual science. Further, if we go to the Hari Bhakti Vilas, we should not accept initiation from a person who is not in the Brahminical order. So we have a very strict with Krishna consciousness. A lot of the devotees in the early days, it was very strict about you had to be in the association of devotees for 6 months before taking first initiation. And there's a beautiful story of His Holiness Indrajumna Swami when he was literally 1 day short. Prabhupada visited the temple and he was 1 day short of the 6 months. So Indrajumna Swami approached the temple president and said, I'm close enough, I've already begun teaching Bhagavatam, I'm the Sankirtan leader, I have this strong desire to take initiation from Srila Prabhupada, can I become initiated? And then the temple president said, no, there's a strict rule in ISKCON that you have to be in the temple for 6 months at minimum before you can become initiated. And then Indrajumna Swami was very disappointed. He was like in this disappointed state. And then he ran out to Srila Prabhupada. He kept a little amount of money that when he joined the temple he kept, because the temple president said, no, you keep that for personal emergencies. Much in the same way when Rupa Goswami kept 50% of his was allocated, and then 25% and 25% was kept for personal expenditures, 50% for Krishna consciousness, and 25% for family and friends. So the temple president was merciful upon Indrajumna Swami, just allowing him to keep whatever his little dakshin he had left. And so then he put it in a note and he wrote a letter to Srila Prabhupada expressing his mind, and he just said it. He said he didn't have the patience or tolerance to be able to keep it down. He said, Prabhupada, I want to become initiated by you, please. And then Prabhupada's response was, in a due course of time, you will be my duly initiated disciple. So there has to be that time factor there first. So there's another beautiful story with Indrajumna Swami when he was doing there was a big feast day. And as we know in Krishna consciousness circles, you wait until midday, and then there's the fasting, and then midday comes, you can break the fast. And there was a Sunday feast for a big Balaram Jayanti. And then so he'd waited till midday, and then someone said, "Oh, Prabhupada's just arrived at the airport, so you're going to have to jump in the car and get Prabhupada." So he missed out on the feast, and then so he jumped in the car, drove the car to Srila Prabhupada at the airport, and then Prabhupada always carried with these big heavy cases, because Prabhupada's mood was, when he arrived, he would always give the saris to the women. He would always have so many gifts to give. He's Brahmana. He has to give in charity and he has to receive charity. So it's beautiful. And then, so as a result of that, there was so much traffic on the way to get back, and there was so many disturbances. And then, because, there were so many devotees following the car, and all these big things happen. And then Indrajumna Swami gets back into the temple, and then he says, "Is there any prasadam left?" Thinking that perhaps, like Draupadi has this endless pot that's always going to be food there. And then he went to the kitchen and found there wasn't even one morsel of food left. There was just like Brahmanas laying in the corner with big bellies. "Oh, that was the best prasadam I've ever had in my life, so good." And then so he said, this time it was like 7 o'clock at night, and he still hadn't had any prasadam. And then he realized he still had to carry the cases upstairs. And so he carried the cases upstairs, and then the normal customary behavior is that when one approaches the spiritual master, one knocks on the door, and then the spiritual master opens the door and then says, or comes in, or come in. There was no instruction. He just burst into Prabhupada's room with the cases, and then he was like this far away from Prabhupada's face. And then he said he just blacked out. He didn't hear what Prabhupada even said. And then so later on, Prabhupada's servant said to him, Prabhupada smacked him on the back and said, "So much endeavor in this material world, but when I take you back home, back to Godhead, everything will be easy and sublime." So that's a very good message for us. We think we do so much activities in Krishna consciousness, there's so much endeavor. Even just to raise enough dakshin to buy a book or to sponsor some books, there's so much endeavor goes into that. So then eventually Prabhupada guarantees, as all his disciples and his grand disciples, he will take us back home, back to Godhead. So there's very beautiful. We're very fortunate to be hearing these stories of the Vaishnava Acharyas, particularly of those endearing stories of Srila Prabhupada, and about how the Brahmanas, and also to be very careful of our association with the Brahmanas and the Vaishnavas, because there has to be that element of care, as we see in the last portion of this explanation of this chapter. Was one should be very careful with the Brahmanas and the Vaishnavas, because they can curse. So essentially it's a warning to all concerned that no one should behave lightly, that there should be that element of awe and respect, as well as love and affection. So I thought that perhaps we should end this Bhagavatam class on a little discussion on Kalidas. Essentially this text is all about prasadam. So then there's Mahaprasadam, and there's also Mahaprasadam. So essentially what happens when we offer the prasadam to Krishna, it comes off the altar, it becomes Mahaprasadam. Then if we take the remnants of the devotees, it becomes Mahaprasadam. And there's a wonderful devotee by the name of Kalidas, and previously he was a tribal girl named Mali in Vraja. So Gaura Ganadesh Dipika 190 explains that Kalidas is an eternally perfect soul. So in his pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, he manifested in the body of a street sweeper. So he's sweeping the streets, and that was in that time was considered a very low class or low caste. And so essentially his uncle, he was the uncle of Raghunath Das Goswami. So Kalidas, his mood of worship was he would only take the remnants of the Vaishnavas. Whatever prasadam he would ever have his whole life would only be the remnants of the Vaishnavas. And it's explained that for a disciple there's three very important things. The first is the dust of the spiritual master's lotus feet. The second one is the water that has been used to bathe the spiritual master's lotus feet. And last one is the remnants of the spiritual master. So if anyone is in a situation where they're with their spiritual master, they have the opportunity to get any one of those three items. It's very potent and very special for their Krishna consciousness. Then there's beautiful stories from following Srila Prabhupada, where one disciple of Prabhupada heard this, and he was thinking, oh, now's my opportunity to get the dust from Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet. So he paid obeisances to Prabhupada, folded his palms, and he said, Prabhupada, can I take the dust from your lotus feet? Thinking there was going to be reciprocation, and Prabhupada said, no, that is not necessary. And sometimes, like so many devotees approached Prabhupada for the dust of his lotus feet, trying to put on his shoes. And there was actually, Indradyumna Swami was saying, in that same temple, where Prabhupada's room was way up a flight of stairs, they used to compete with each other who would be that person to change Srila Prabhupada's shoes. And so, we understood that Prabhupada was going to walk down the steps for Mongol Arati at around about 4:10. So when Prabhupada arrived there, the first devotee would be waiting at 3:30 a.m. ready to put on Prabhupada's shoes. No one's going to get in my way, no one's going to interrupt him, this is my service. And then gradually it became, the next day it was 3 a.m. The next day it was midnight. So devotee literally had to stay awake the whole night waiting for Prabhupada to walk down just to change Srila Prabhupada's shoes. And there's a beautiful story where His Holiness Indradyumna Swami was explaining, in a lecture in Vrindavan, he was saying, the one thing that I'm completely bereft of, that I never got the opportunity to change Srila Prabhupada's shoes. And then because in Vrindavan there's often 3,000 or 4,000 people listening to a class, and then someone way off in the distance was saying, yes you did, which Gurudev heard as a heckle. So he kind of ignored it, but then this person wouldn't go away. Yes, you did, I've got proof. And then so gradually the servants of Maharaj went out to him and said, what are you saying? And he said, I've actually got a photo of Indradyumna Swami changing the shoes of Srila Prabhupada. So, and then they said, okay, come up to the front of the stage. And then, so His Holiness Indradyumna Swami was very pleased as a result of remembering that he did actually get the opportunity to change Srila Prabhupada's shoes. So this vow that Kalidas took of only taking the remnants of the devotees was very potent and very much demonstrative of his love towards Lord Chaitanya. And so it's explained that the Lord gives so much mercy to anyone who has faith in the Vaishnavas and eats their remnants that he has nothing left to give. So it's essentially, we might feel shameful, we might feel a little bit disgusted, oh, why would I take the remnants of that person's food? But it is Maha Prasadam. So the dust of the devotee's feet, the water that has washed his feet, and the remnants of his food are three very powerful aids to spiritual practice. You will win Krishna's pleasure. This has been proved by the experience of Kalidas. And this pastime is explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Canto 3, Chapter 16, text 58 to 63. So, on that note, we understand that all Vaishnavas are worshipable, irregardless of the caste in which they were born. Vaishnava is beyond the material qualities and thus is not to be identified with his nationality or caste. So on that note, thank you so much for your attention in this Bhagavatam class. I pray for blessings that I can continue on this service, and I beg forgiveness if I committed any offences. Does anyone have any comments or a question at all? Or all good? Sneha?
What was the concept of calories in affection and weakness?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much for asking. So essentially, there is affection, and then there's also attachment. So if we look at the qualities of Dhritarashtra, he had attachment towards his son. Therefore, whilst he had, love towards him, he didn't have the capacity to correct him with any discipline because he was too attached. So when we're too attached, we can't say, oh, you need to do this or you've done this wrong, because we feel that would take away, we're too attached. But then if you look at the saintly qualities of Vidura, he had affection for Dhritarashtra. He was prepared to say the strong, harsh words, even if it meant that he was evicted from the kingdom. And he did. He went on parikram, and then so as a result of the affection is necessary, the nice words, the love, and the adoration and the worship of devotees, but then the attachment is not such a good quality. So we have to be affectionate and not attached. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for your attendance. Have a wonderful day in Krishna consciousness. I hope everyone had a wonderful Ram Naomi yesterday. All glories to Srila Prabhupada for this great opportunity to chant and hearing and chanting in the association of devotees. So Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.